Hello, welcome to another edition of Chopped Greens. I am your host, Philip Amerine, calling in on our, Chopped Greens phone line, I guess we'll call it for lack of a better term as of right now. We've got Luke Wright on the phone.
Hello, everybody.
Now, the reason why we're doing this via conference, if you will, is because we just finished watching the NFL draft, first round, and this is the immediate aftermath. So even though you'll get it a day late in case of any breaking news, or even if the second round starts to get going, we had to. I told Luke we have to get the immediate reaction to the first round, because there's so many things going on. I don't even know where to get started. First off, without even discussing the draft, just as a quick tidbit, the Raptors move on, so congratulations to Luke. They finally caught up to the Cavaliers.
I survived.
Yeah, now...
I survived the... Now, it was stressing me out, not going to lie.
Yeah, I was going to say, Luke, you better be honest, buddy. You have to be honest with me. You had to have felt a little sweaty, right?
I was. I think the biggest... The moment where the sweating was the most,
of course,
was probably this exact game. I turned it off when they were up like 20 points. I started watching the draft so that we could talk about it for this podcast, and I didn't even think about it. And then next thing I know, I'm checking the scores, and it's the fourth quarter, and the Bucks are up by 2, and I thought it was a typo. I thought there's no way they give up a 25-point lead, but lo and behold, they found another way to scare me.
To scare you, to make it interesting, to make you a little sweaty.
Yeah.
So
I had to turn off the draft for a few picks just so that I could watch the end of that game.
Right, because let's be honest, that mattered a little bit more in the immediate future for you. So just as a really quick, without anything, does this change your pick at all? Does this make you now a little more sweaty for the Cavs, or you like your chances still?
I still like my chances. I was always a little sweaty about the Raptors beating Cavs, but I'm not too overly concerned about it. I expected the series to go to 7 games to begin with, so I'm not too overly concerned yet.
All right. Well, let's move on to the NFL draft, where dreams are realized by the incoming rookies. The hearts are broken by commissioners who get horrendously booed every year. It's a delicious treat for anybody watching. For 32 times that the commissioner has to walk up there and give out a pick, he gets horrendously booed till the actual name comes out of his mouth. It's deliciously juicy. I love it.
Did you see him pumping the crowd up to boo him more at the very beginning?
Well, to be fair, he's in Philadelphia. I mean, you gotta work that crowd. That crowd is a very emotionally angry crowd. Philadelphians probably know what I'm talking about. They aren't happy. They just are not happy people. They are happy with being unhappy. So God bless them. They came out in droves. I heard 25 minutes before anybody was even there, they were shouting out, Cowboys suck, for no apparent reason. The Cowboys weren't even there. Like, there was no reason to just start this chant, and yet here they are chanting, Cowboys suck, for no apparent reason.
I don't blame them.
You're in unison with them, Luke?
Yes. Just because I love a good chant in the middle of no reason. Like you said, like, they just randomly were like, you know what, guys? Let's just start a Cowboys sucks chant. It warms my heart a little bit that fans are that committed.
You found an adopted fan base to join, Luke, it sounds like, when in Philadelphia. And it's in Philadelphia that we go to the first pick of the draft. Pretty standard. I mean, in the end, this is kind of what everybody projected it out to be, Myles Garrett. It was just really, for me, when they're taking that entire 15 initial minutes for or was it 10? I know it was 10 for the rest of the night. Yeah. When they take that initial full 10 minutes of the draft, even though you've had months and months of knowing where you're going to be, they took the entire 10 minutes to see if there were any last-minute trades that really pumped your socks off. But pretty standard draft for the Browns taking Myles Garrett top of the pick. Do you agree with that move?
For the most part, yeah. He was pretty much the clear-cut number one by almost everybody. Some people, most notably Warren Sapp, questioned his effort. And, looking at the tape, it's hard to disagree with that. There were definitely times where you could just tell he was taking plays off. But, that's something you see a lot of college players doing. They don't want to – if they go all out every single play in college and get hurt and lose a chance to be a number one overall pick in the NFL, it would just hurt them. So I think a lot of college players struggle with that. But overall, I think it was a good pick. I agree with it. I'm actually proud that the Browns just went with the safe choice of just picking Myles Garrett and moving on. This won't be the first time we talk about the Browns. Overall, I think they definitely won the first round.
Right. It's a long draft, and it's not only in the first round, but you're right. I think that they made a big impression. I will say, though, that unfortunately the stigma that's associated with the Browns, even though I like the direction that they're moving in, I know for me personally, I dread if there's a player that I love that I really want to see, I wholeheartedly hope that they do not go to the Browns because I just absolutely know that they're going to mess it up somehow. And let's look back at even the RG3 draft. I was so afraid that the Redskins weren't going to get that pick from the Rams and that it was going to go to the Cleveland Browns and that somehow RG3 would go to oblivion down in Cleveland. Turns out he was going to be destined to go there anyways. But let's move on to the number 2 pick. So it starts out to be San Francisco, and then finally our first dramatic event of the night happens. Last year, there really was no drama. To me, it was kind of boring. The only interesting tidbit was Laramie Tunsil's precipitous fall down draft boards. But outside of that, there really were no fantastic trades. It wasn't a very sexy draft in that respect. But this drama all around with the San Francisco's going back, Chicago Bears moving forward. You said that you had a problem with this?
Yeah, I was expecting the Niners to trade the second overall pick, and I think that a lot of people were kind of expecting John Lynch to do that. And in the end, they just absolutely took full advantage of the Bears. The Bears gave up a third-round pick, a fourth-round pick of this year's draft, and then they gave up a third-round pick next year to move up one spot to pick Mitchell Trubisky. And to be honest, more than likely, he was going to be there anyways at 3. Unless they had some very overwhelming fear that somebody else was trying to trade into the second to specifically get Trubisky, which I personally don't think was happening. There was no reason to give up that much to draft a player when you already had Mike Glennon just signed.
Well, my problem with that, Luke, is I do think that something was happening. This will only be verified at later points and times down the line. Really, we as we go back in time, I think it was like Andy Reid, even way late in the year when they finally met Dak Prescott and the Cowboys at some point. Or he was talking about Carson Wentz or the Cowboys, whatever it came out to be, but he admitted to having to want to pick Dak Prescott. And I found that to be just fascinating that he would want that quarterback. And then so applying that to this draft, I really do think I have to – it makes no sense otherwise of why the Chicago Bears would give up so much to move up one spot if – and this is a big if there was not a legitimate fear that somebody else was going to do the exact same thing. I think that later on in the coming days to come, it's going to leak out that either the San Francisco 49ers were playing with the Bears, saying that they really, really were hot on Mitchell Trubisky, which is totally understandable. They're still candidates to draft DeShone Kizer in the coming days, and as well as the Browns. We'll see which one of them gets him. If not, maybe the Bills, whoever. But the point is that maybe they teased them that they were going to do it, and that they just needed a little extra incentive to go to Solomon Thomas, the defensive end out out of Stanford. Maybe they were able to convince the Chicago Bears that the Jets were going to give them a huge landfill of picks to do it. We never know if down the line, if maybe the Houston Texans had confirmed. I mean, we won't know, but I'm imagining that that's what the case had to be. Otherwise, you're right, so that's why I think it's absolutely wrong.
Well, I mean, we did, out of the 6 trades total we had in the draft, 3 of them came within the first 12 picks. All 3 of them resulted in quarterbacks. Trubisky at 2, Mahomes at 10, and Watson at 12. So, I mean, you did see a lot of teams trade up to get quarterbacks. I just personally feel like it wasn't worth what you gave up to move up the one spot.
Now,
I just feel like...
No, well, I was just going to ask you, Luke, out of those 3 quarterbacks, because it really is the sexiest position in all of sports, not even just the NFL, do you believe any of them warranted their trade value or even where they were picked?
I don't think any of them, if you look at it as a very objective standpoint, no. I don't think that Trubisky was the second best player in the draft. I don't think that Mahomes is the 10th, and I don't think Watson was the 12th. I think that very much so was not the case here. I think this was the case of people overreaching. Out of the 3 trades, though, I think that the Houston one was probably the best one.
Really?
They got to move up. They traded with Cleveland. They gave up the 25th. They swapped first rounders. Houston got 12. Cleveland got 25. Cleveland then got a 6th rounder, and then they got a 1st and 2nd rounder for next year. And then Houston ended up getting something back in a 4th rounder for this year. They were the only one out of the 3 to get something back, and I don't think that Houston's 1st and 2nd round pick, while obviously they are 1st and 2nd rounders, they will be valuable. I don't think that they will be as valuable because I think Houston's going to be really good this upcoming year, so I think these will be 2 late 1st and 2nd rounders. Outside of that one, I think Kansas City got away with a pretty good trade. They gave up their 1st rounder for next year, and then they gave up a 3rd rounder this year. They just didn't get anything in return. So I don't...
Well, I'm just going to tell you, Luke, as a general stance, I usually don't mind. If you actually believe and you have faith and conviction in who your quarterback is, go get him. It doesn't matter the cost. You go get him because even the 16th best quarterback in the NFL, I'm just going to put Andy Dalton there. I'm just throwing out names of someone who I think is middle of the pack. Even Andy Dalton is better than the best defensive player out there. I mean, what is competency at quarterback? What is that worth to you? And to me, it's. I mean, if somebody could draft Aaron Rodgers, if we could have a real life Madden NFL fantasy draft, and first overall pick is whatever, how much is that pick worth? That's insurmountable, and it's going to go to Aaron Rodgers, maybe Tom Brady, Andrew Luck. The first 32 picks would be quarterbacks. So I say all this to point out that if the Chicago Bears really did love the quarterback Mitchell Trubisky. Me personally, I did not. I actually really don't like it. I don't care if how your ceiling is or what your tangible qualities are. If you're not able to perform, we look at Deshaun Watson. I was much higher on him. He was my favorite player coming out of this quarterback class. With a sneaky pick being Patrick Mahomes. I actually did enjoy him. I thought that he might be going later on to Arizona. That didn't happen. But Deshaun Watson was able to put talent to film, and it actually resulted in things that we could actually check out, records, championships, even awards. All this, Mitchell Trubisky only had 1 year, and outside of defensive ends or NBA basketball players, I mean, it really doesn't matter to me. The quarterback position is so incredibly time consuming and such a big commitment that I don't think that was the right pick for the Chicago Bears if they were going to indeed go quarterback.
No, I agree. I agree with most of what you said. I don't think the first 32 teams would pick quarterbacks. I
Really?
don't think no, not at all. Are you trying to tell me someone would rather pick Brock Osweiler than Von Miller?
I'm trying to tell you that somebody will pick Jimmy Garoppolo over Von Miller.
No, you said those, but you're not going to find 32 quarterbacks that are more valuable than people like a Von Miller or a J.J. Watt. Even Andy Dalton, I would take Von Miller over Andy Dalton, and I do consider him literally the middle of the pack.
Right. I felt pretty confident in Andy Dalton. I didn't. No disrespect to the Ginger Rifle.
And I think you did have a lot of good points about quarterbacks. That is, like you said, the sexiest position in pretty much all of sports, if we're being honest. And I do think it is something that is incredibly important as a franchise and something you must have if you are looking to have a better, like a very realistic chance of winning a Super Bowl. But there are teams that have proven that you don't need a quarterback to win a Super Bowl. Most recently, Denver, when they were playing Carolina. You can also go back to 85 Bears. You could go to the Ravens when they won back in 2000. So, I think while it is incredibly important, and I do think you would see probably the first 10 to 15 picks in a Madden fantasy draft be quarterbacks. In the end, I think there are a lot more valuable players. Yeah, so I think there are a lot more valuable players in this draft when you look outside of the quarterback position. Most notably in this draft, we had Myles Garrett, Jamal Adams, even Solomon Thomas, Leonard Fournette. These are all great players who can lead a team's offense or defense. And I think that's something that you see a lot when you look at these drafts year by year rather than when you look at it from a Madden fantasy standpoint, is people tend to underestimate other positions because of how important the quarterback position is.
Well, let me reverse that on you for just really quick, even though we'll get back to the draft here really fast. But if we look at the Seattle Seahawks before Russell Wilson, they still had that great defense, and they wasn't able to complete the full transformation. They got one victory over the Super Bowl reigning champs at home with beast mode running amok, but that was it. We look at the Denver Broncos post Manning. And really, even though it's not like they were riding his ability anymore, his physical ability, his intellectual ability as a top-notch quarterback remained, and it was almost like having a coach on the floor, and it's plug and play, really, when you get down to that level of intellect. So I disagree with you wholeheartedly. There is no doubt in my mind that the first 32 picks if for some reason, in the 50th anniversary of the NFL, they were to say, all right, we will honor all contracts, but what we're going to do just to shake things up is hold an actual full-on draft. The first 32 picks, and maybe even the next 32 picks, if not sprinkled in there, would be quarterbacks and backup quarterbacks. But that actually sounds like a good discussion at another point in time, because that has a chance to get down and dirty there. Let's see. My next big surprise, I don't know about you, but my next big surprise came at pick number 5 with the Tennessee Titans. Who is Corey Davis?
I knew who he was going into this. I thought he was really probably the best wide receiver in this group.
Really?
But yeah.
Even though they never got a workout with him, you still, because again, I heard rumblings of him being a late first rounder, so it wasn't completely out of nowhere like them drafting an undrafted player like maybe Arian Foster maybe or something back in his day, but it was they literally had not worked him out, and I don't think he's played for a year or something.
He had back in his he did play last year. He did miss a year with a very bad neck injury.
Yeah.
But he's from Western Michigan. Because he's from Western Michigan, which I think was the only school to offer him the football scholarship. Not a lot of people heard about him. He was one of those players that really comes up during this time of year because he's from a smaller school. Hassan Whiteside is from Temple is another kind of good example of that. But I really liked his big playability. I really like him as a wide receiver. I did not like him. I think 5 was too high. I think Tennessee had a lot of other needs they could have addressed at this point in the draft. I think they got worried that if they had waited till later on, they wouldn't have been able to address the need that they felt they had for another big-time target for Mariota. The Titans were like number 1 in the league last year at rushing. However, they just didn't have a ton of people for Mariota to throw at. And, we had a total of three wide receivers drafted in this first round, all 3 of them coming in the first 9 picks.
Right. And that was going to be my point, Luke, is that really, if you passed up on Corey Davis, there's only Mike Williams and John Ross who were relatively close. So, I mean, you can see that there was a bit of a run on wide receivers early with the 7th overall Los Angeles Chargers picking Mike Williams, of course, and the 9th overall pick being the Cincinnati Bengals with John Ross. I interrupted you, though.
I think this whole draft, and we see it in the first 12 picks, was dictated not by the depth that we all thought we would see with how many great defensive players there are, but the first 12 picks were all supply and demand picks. You had 3 quarterbacks taken. You had all 3 of the wide receivers taken. You had both of the 2 running backs taken. You didn't see a slew of defensive players until after that. You had the main names, Myles Garrett,
Jamal Adams,
Marshawn Lattimore. But I think what happened, what a lot of people didn't really fully maybe expect to happen, was that teams at the top of the draft were worried that they wouldn't be able to get these players. So instead of taking a player from a deep skill position like a cornerback or a linebacker or defensive end, they decided, okay, we'll go ahead and get the best of the best in the groups that there aren't a lot of. And then we can worry about everything else in the later on draft picks. And I think that's something that you saw affect this draft a lot more than people thought would actually happen.
And also, one thing that I thought affected it all is that a lot of these teams had following picks later on in the first round, like the Tennessee Titans. Later on in the draft, they addressed their cornerback need. Of course, the Browns had many picks to go back and address other needs, as well as the San Francisco 49ers. Just with those additional picks, I think that they really took where there was finite resources, in quotation marks, of course, finite resources as far as the cream of the crop, as opposed to where they really needed to go, like much to your point. So they skimmed off the top and then thought, you know what, this is such a deep draft, we'll just address it later. So excellent point by you. Moving on, just as a quick, because we already addressed the quarterbacks, but I wanted to just one more time, homer at home. Kansas City Chiefs, this was the second time in all of Andy Reid's head coaching tenure that he had picked a quarterback in the first round. The only other selection, of course, being Donovan McNabb with the Eagles. Patrick Mahomes, this was a big surprise for me. How about you, Luke?
Was a surprise that they traded up 17 spots to pick him, but I love Patrick Mahomes, and I'm not surprised that this pick happened. The Andy Reid in particular, as I think most people know, is a very quarterback-oriented coach. That's just kind of his special skill set, and I think a lot of people look at Alex Smith's age and the fact that Alex Smith is really, I know some people hate the term, but the fact is he's a game manager. He wins. There's nothing wrong with it. He is a game manager. So I think what Andy Reid was doing is he wanted to get a big arm quarterback like Patrick Mahomes who can make every single throw that Reid can throw at him, and then let him sit and develop behind a true professional in Alex Smith. And I think it's going to work out great. Coming into this draft, Patrick Mahomes was actually my favorite quarterback. I know he's not. He comes from an air raid offense, so some of his numbers are inflated. But overall, he's been just one of my favorites to watch as he elevates up the draft board. I wasn't expecting him to go top 10, though.
No, not at all. I will say I find this completely fascinating. This move, although unforeseeable for a lot of people, are actually, now that it's actual solidified, it actually makes a whole lot of sense. And much to many of your points that you pointed out, Patrick Mahomes is the fire to Alex Smith's water. And, and really, this was actually the perfect place, because what's been understood for all the quarterbacks available in this draft was, while there may be a franchise saver in this draft, none of them you want to start from day one. None of them do you want to have going out there in week one and actually taking the reins of your offense, maybe late in the draft. But really, when we look at Alex Smith and the situation that Patrick Mahomes is going to be going directly to, this just makes so much sense, because Mahomes is really his biggest detriment, besides being somebody that you would want to saturate and mature on the bench behind a solid starter, which Alex Smith is. When we look at the traits and qualities of both quarterbacks, it's actually very different. While Patrick Mahomes and Alex Smith both have wheels and they can actually move very well inside the pocket and a little bit outside of the pocket, Alex Smith will never be accused of having a huge arm. Patrick Mahomes loves to take chances. He's a bit of a gunslinger, been equated to Brett Favre time and time again. And I think that if you can somehow create a blend, have the Alex Smith mindset with Patrick Mahomes' body, which I think is what essentially Andy Reid is looking to do and really instill in him, and with somebody like Alex Smith, who is no stranger to mentoring a young quarterback, i.e. Colin Kaepernick, I think that this could be a marriage built for a blissful future for the Kansas City Chiefs, and actually take full advantage of that talented top-to-bottom roster that they have created around Alex Smith, and actually take them to the promised land. Although you do still have to go 2 more years at least with the contract situation of Alex Smith. You still have to stick around for 2 more years with Alex Smith. I really do. I think this was one of the most perfect marriages of player to team in the draft.
The only thing I would have done is, again, I think that these teams are shooting themselves in the foot with how early they're picking quarterbacks. I feel like you didn't have to jump up 17 spots and give up your third rounder and your first rounder next year to get him. I feel like if you had just waited a little bit longer, you could have traded. I know Arizona was looking to trade down, so they would have been a good trade. You could have traded with Cleveland. A lot of these mid-round teams, I feel like you could have swapped for and probably given up less. I think these teams are so busy sabotaging each other by picking these players so high up that they're making each other go higher and higher up to pick up quarterbacks, when in reality, if everyone had just stand pat, they probably could have waited and saved themselves a little bit of stock for the future.
Of course, it's always funny, though, to see when reality hits fantasy and the two merge together. Because when we look at before the draft, I mean, all the quote-unquote experts that we see on TV, and really are they experts if they don't correctly predict it? I don't know. But if we see them and they predict that, say, Patrick Mahomes is the 3rd best quarterback in the draft, and Deshaun Watson is the 2nd or the 3rd, and then Patrick Mahomes is the 4th, then does trading up above a team to get Patrick Mahomes ahead of Deshaun Watson, is that a mistake, or is that, it's just I've always found that to be an interesting topic of when you're quiet and when it's an assets game and you're trying to create and protect and use assets to the best and most logical ability that you as a team have. It's always interesting to see at the end of the day where everybody was picked, and then you can kind of at the end see if you were justified in your thinking or if it was all just it was all just rumblings of the NFL draft. So I talked about marriages, and Patrick Mahomes had found a pretty good home with the Kansas City Chiefs, and I wanted to talk to you, Luke, about which player you found to be the most logical pick, so the most appropriate pick for player and team. I was leaning the Saints cornerback pick at number 11, Marshawn Lattimore, cornerback of Ohio State. I thought that was a really good, solid pick, addressed a perfect need for the Saints. But then, all the way down at number 24, the Oakland Raiders. They took Garyon Conley, the other Ohio State cornerback, and it really just, how Raiders was this pick? So that's my logical pick. Do you agree with that, or?
I think that's a pretty logical pick. I mean, in the end, I do think Conley is getting a bad rap right now for the whole situation.
Oh, yeah.
When there's so much left to be decided. I did, but that was my first initial thought when I saw the Raiders pick him. Overall, aside from, because I mean, realistically, I think any pick after 16, more times than not, typically the teams are in a good enough position to where whoever they pick is a good fit, because most of those teams are drafting mostly just for value rather than needs anyway. I think one of my favorite picks was the New York Jets picking Jamal Adams at 6. I think that is a great pick for them. I think that's something that addresses a huge need while also being a great value pick. So overall, that was probably one of my favorite picks of the draft, was the Jets having an opportunity to completely screw up their first-round pick, and instead they actually make a great decision, pick up a great player, and I think that guy is going to be able to really help the Jets defense this upcoming year. I also love Christian McCaffrey going to Carolina.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be a great spot for him to play with Jonathan Stewart for a year and still be able to pick up touches in almost every aspect of special teams and offense. So those are probably my two favorite picks from a fit standpoint, while also giving pretty good value. Carolina might have reached a little bit with McCaffrey, but overall I think that it was good value with where they picked.
Just as a quick aside, the game went final a few moments ago. San Antonio Spurs move on and advance past the Grizzlies, 103-96. So just a quick update there. So San Antonio, that actually turned out to be a much more competitive series than I anticipated after the first two games. It's crazy.
It was a fun series, and the best part is Fizdale just gave us a few more jokes that will live on in infamy. So that was, I think, the highlight of that whole series. They won't rook me and take that for data.
Take that for data. Boom.
Great rant.
Oh, that right there, that alone, that is all just the coach that you want. That's the Tomlin-esque of that, garnering guys and motivating them to stay together. I loved it. All right, so just a few more storylines here as we wrap up our NFL draft coverage from Chopped Greens. So earlier in the day, I just kind of want to address rumors because, of course, as a Broncos fan, and we both are, as a Broncos nation, I should say, we all were anticipatory of where they were going to go this draft, so many different ways that they could go. And earlier in the day, it said that they were inquiring teams to move up in the draft. And I don't know about you, but I completely found that unnecessary. And especially seeing how the draft shaked out, I actually enjoyed what they did of staying pat. I felt giving up assets in this particular draft for what their needs would have been a mistake, because really, when you look at their team, they don't need defense. So a lot of the players that you would have gone up for special talents, whether it be safeties, corners, what have you, they already had in spades. So nothing there. Quarterbacks, of course, a lot of players are being groomed for the future in the quarterback position. They already have their quarterback of the future from last year, Paxton Lynch. Hopefully still being groomed and almost ready to go and take the bubble wrap off of him this year. But finally, they take Garrett Bowles, the offensive tackle out of Utah. I like the pick. Do you think that there's what do you make of all these rumors? I guess I should say that just peruse and permeate into the atmosphere of the world, and we're like, to me, that just never made any sense.
I think something that happens every year whenever you follow your team is because it's such a common thing to trade up or down. I liked that they stayed there. I like that they picked Garrett Bowles. Just a fun fact for you. Since the modern-day draft in 1967, this was actually the latest that the first round has gone until they had to wait for an offensive line to be picked.
Yeah. And they definitely needed to address that offensive line.
Yeah, they addressed the need. I didn't mind I wouldn't have minded if they had traded up depending upon how much they would have given up. Because the main rumor that I had heard was they were trying to make a move to move up for McCaffrey. And I actually love McCaffrey. I think he would have been a great fit for Denver, but in the end, I like going offensive line as well. When you saw when you look at everything that was being given up to jump that far ahead, because if you look at it, McCaffrey ended up going 8, which means you would have had to trade into the top 7. And I think, like you said, it wouldn't have made sense to have to give up as many assets as you would have. So in the end, I'm okay with it. I like the pick, so I think we did good. Or I think that the Broncos did good, since obviously I am not a Denver Bronco organization member myself. But yeah, I think, and that's something I think you see with every team, though, is experts can't be experts on every single team. You hear it a ton on local sports radio, Burns and Gamble and stuff. Everyone was saying Cardinals will take the quarterback. But, a lot of the local experts are like, no, they won't. And in the end, they see the defensive linebacker, Hassan Whiteside. Sorry, not Hassan Whiteside. Wrong there. Hassan Reddick.
Wrong color.
So I think that's just the general consensus is that these experts think that they're experts on the draft and they're experts on the players themselves, but then they try to force those rankings into individual organizations without fully understanding what the organizations are trying to do. So I think in the end, that's something that every fan goes through, is listening to all these rumors that don't make sense. So, that's just kind of my 2 cents on when it comes to rumors on draft day.
Right. And just as an aside, I think you can find running backs later on in the draft. As special as I think McCaffrey would have been for the Broncos, I think that you can find another player much later in the draft. And for the Cardinals, just like I said, Deshaun Kaiser's still there. If you really want to trade up and get him, it's much easier to trade up in the second round than the first round. Go ahead, go for that. But now we move on to the bad side of the draft. Luke Wright, which pick was your most hated pick? Which pick were you just disgusted at, threw up some tater tots in your mouth, and you were like, hey, what are they thinking? This is just awful.
Overall, I don't think there were really that many of them. I think a lot of teams picked a lot of solid players for where they're at, but the pick I'd say I hate the most, besides Mitchell Trubisky at 2, which I think we kind of went over already. Mm-hmm. I didn't like pick number 9, Cincinnati Bengals drafting John Ross.
Wow.
Washington. I wasn't a fan. He was the last wide receiver to be picked after Mike Williams at 7 and Corey Davis at 5. And I feel like John Ross probably would have been there in the second round if he hadn't had been picked. He's not durable. He's not a particularly amazing pass catcher. He's just really fast, and he's good. And I think if he can stay healthy, he'll have a good career, especially being able to play with Green and Eifert. but I feel like there was so much more value. There's so many other needs the Bengals needed to address, and even if they couldn't get John Ross there and in the second round or whenever they pick next, they could have easily gotten a different wide receiver that would have been able to still help their core out. So overall, that was kind of the pick that when I looked at it, I was like, what are you doing, Bengals? Like, that doesn't really help your team out, especially considering at that point you still had a lot of good players. Marshawn Lattimore, Hassan Reddick, Derek Barnett, Malik Hooker. So there were just so many great players, and instead you pulled a truly Raiders move and just picked the player based off of how fast they were.
Right. My most hated pick, as you might think, it was Corey Davis, number 5 with the Tennessee Titans. I give them a pass only because, again, I will give you the benefit of the doubt that if you fully believe that this is the player, that this is the person, then really I'll just give you a mulligan. Maybe you know more football than I do, and I'm just a stupid person who doesn't see Kristaps Porzingis coming and, have at it. So I'll let them live. So that actually leads me to the Los Angeles Chargers. At pick number 7, picking up Mike Williams, wide receiver at Clemson. And this doesn't even have anything to do with the player. I actually thought Mike Williams was the number 1 wide receiver in my fantasy picks, but I just hate the marriage because, for one, you have Phillip Rivers and a declining defense. Even though the defense is statistically part of the top, they could not hold on to leads or even climb back into games, stop the other teams from scoring. And they lost so many close games last year, which led them to have such a high draft pick. When you have a top-notch quarterback like Phillip Rivers, he's making average dudes make passes. And really, I know it's hard to say because you don't know from year to year what you're going to get from players, whether it be talent or ability or durability. And especially in the Chargers case, durability is a huge issue because they have a lot of talent, just the durability is a huge issue. I can understand why they went there because it's a top-notch player, but like you said, there's still a lot of quote-unquote 5-star recruits still on the board. I mean, Marshawn Lattimore, Hassan Reddick was still there. Really, I just did not enjoy them taking a wide receiver that early when you have a great quarterback that can compensate for underperforming wide receiver play. And that takes my most hated pick.
Yeah. And another thing, I would also actually put Marshawn Lattimore going to the Saints as a not good marriage.
Oh, you didn't like that?
I don't mind it, which is why I didn't put it as my main one. I just feel like when you're as bad as the Saints are on defense, you need to build from the front 7 on out rather than just pick one random defensive back who, if you're lucky, might be able to shut down one wide receiver. And I think that really all New Orleans tried to do was put a Band-Aid over a broken bone. They needed something more drastic. I think they should have probably picked up Hassan Reddick or a Derek Barnett or even a Malik Hooker. I know Hooker's still a defensive back, but I personally would have preferred to see a safety over a corner at that junction of trying to rebuild a defense. So, I mean, I don't hate it because Lattimore was the number 1 cornerback, but I don't like it. I don't think it was a good fit.
Fair enough. Now, my last point and observation in this draft was, although we had a lot of Alabama talent, I think it actually became fairly evident in the prevailing thought that I had as the draft lingered on and on and on. The Alabama players, especially the more talented ones, I think that they're getting passed up due to their excessive use in the in the college rankings and how Nick Saban just uses them and gets all they can out of them, and how recent Alabama productions have not, players have just not been producing up to their talent level. We look at different various Alabama players, most significantly, of course, Reuben Foster, dropping all the way to 31 from the San Francisco 49ers. So they got a quote-unquote steal. We'll see in the years to come. But even somebody as qualified as O.J. Howard, tight end Alabama, that was a late pick for me for a solid number one tight end who I thought had the potential to be a non-risky player to take that you really don't have to worry about once you pull the trigger on O.J. Howard. What say you?
No, I think it was really just, it was a bad draft for Alabama just because people didn't need Alabama players, if that makes sense. In the end, they had, let's see here, Marlon Humphrey 1, Jonathan Allen 2, O.J. Howard 3, and then Reuben Foster 4. They still had 4 first-rounders, just based off of my very quick count here.
Right.
But, I mean, tight ends in general are not very highly valued in the first round. He was the first and only one of 2 tight ends to be picked in the whole first round.
And now it's the first time that 2 tight ends have been picked since, I believe, 2001. So he was the 3 out of 4 picks that were Alabama. And Marlon Humphrey, he didn't get picked because there were one other cornerback and then 2 other safeties that were better, 2 other defensive backs who were better than Malik
him.
Hooker, Marshawn Latimer, Jamal Adams.
Yeah, and then you see Jonathan Allen, and there were a total of, looking at my notes here, I want to say it was 6 defensive ends. Yeah, we had 6 defensive ends who were picked in this first round. So I think it wasn't anything against Alabama. I think it was just a matter of the players Alabama produced were in skill categories that they didn't need. Normally you see corners and defensive ends as sort of a weaker skill group in the draft. But this draft was just so deep, and you had so many quality players from it. There was no need to have a stranglehold on Alabama players like there has been in years past. So I think that was kind of the main issue with it. People just this was just quote-unquote a down year for Alabama, even though, like I said, they still had 4 players in the first round. So I don't think it was anything against Alabama. I just think that's how the cards happened to align.
Yeah, I can see where perhaps if there's more talented players elsewhere, of course you're not going to automatically go by school. You're not going to go, since you're an alumni of Alabama, you're going to say, well, let's take the best Alabama player. No, I think at some point you have to logically go about it, and at the end of the day, the results will just be there. And it could just be coincidence, but I think that this is the beginning of a trend that we're seeing, that dominant pick of Alabama players at the top of the round. I don't think that they're a surefire thing anymore, where they normally would be top 15 players. I think we're slowly moving around to where they're more spaced in the entire draft, and we'll see how that really affects Alabama's reputation and drafting ability in the coming years. Any last parting words for the draft from you, Luke? Any last thoughts? Any big ideas?
Big ideas.
Yeah.
I think, and I might be going out on a limb here, but
go out on that limb, buddy. Go out there.
You gotta be bold. I think this 5 years from now, we will look back and say, this was the year Cleveland turned it all around.
Whoa. Even without getting a quarterback.
Yes, because that is what made me think this is the year in which they turn it all around. They didn't force any bad picks. Myles Garrett at number 1, good pick. They traded number 12 instead of forcing a bad pick. They got Jabril Peppers, who I'm not 100% sold on, but at the same time, it was a good value pick that they made based off of good decisions. Even if he doesn't work out, it was a smart move. And then
just a great player, to your point.
Yeah, and they traded back. They saw an opportunity to trade back into the first round, and they did, and they picked up a really good tight end. So just overall, I think they made a lot of good moves, a lot of value-based moves, and I just don't see the future of Cleveland looking as bad as some people like to think that it is. So I think this is the year that 5 years from now, when Cleveland is a 9-7 team that's looking towards the end of the season to make a playoff berth, wild card maybe, I think this is going to be the year people look back and think, wow, that 2017 draft, that is when Cleveland started to turn it all around. So that's my bold prediction for this draft so far.
Just to directly address that before I move on to my big thought, next year they're going to be awful again. They're going to try and tank for the quarterback coming out of USC, Sam Darnold, and that'll be when they actually turn it around. But you were close, Luke. You're just a year behind. Don't worry, buddy.
Hey, they got to start building now so that next year when they get the quarterback, they'll just be even a step closer.
There you go. And funny you should talk about the Browns because they were really, ironically, the big player of this draft. My big takeaway is that we can now have them walk down the aisle, exchange rings, because the Browns and the Texans are officially married. Every single freaking trade now is going to involve somehow the Browns and the Texans, because if swapping second rounders wasn't enough for Brock Osweiler, now the Browns have the Texans first and second round. So really, they're hoping that the Texans just completely eat it next year, and that Tom Savage goes down, Deshaun Watson goes down, and that everybody just really, the whole city catches on fire. So go Cleveland. I hope that this is the beginning of a beautiful relationship, and to be honest with you, even if it's not good for them, it's the Browns. You can't really hide that. So I think what we're going to do, Luke, is we went extremely long on this. So what we're going to do is we are going to now probably break here so this will be the end of the podcast for this part. We'll do a part 1, part 2 series, and I'll release both, for the listeners today, for us another day, and we'll do our Give Me 5 in the next part. Stay tuned to SoundCloud. Just hop on to the next episode. We'll both be there. Luke will be chewing some tater tots in the meantime. And are you ready for Give Me 5, Luke?
Oh, I'm ready for Give Me 5.
Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you in the next episode.